Tom jolted awake to the deafening silence. Something was wrong. The rhythmic hum of his farm's irrigation system, a sound he'd come to rely on every dawn, was missing. Heart pounding, he bolted out of bed and raced outside, where a scene of surreal chaos met his eyes. His beloved shed, the one where his pregnant wife, Lisa, stored precious farming equipment and cherished heirlooms, had been violently forced open. In the cool pre-dawn light, Tom saw shattered glass and ransacked belongings strewn across the dew-soaked grass. The intruders had not only left a trail of damage, but also a chilling message scrawled in bold on the shed door: "We enforce order." For years, the strict rules of the local homeowners association had been a thorn in Tom's side. Their petty fines, arbitrary inspections, and oppressive regulations had always seemed designed to squash any hint of individuality. But nothing could have prepared him for this brazen violation, an unannounced raid on his family's safe haven. As Tom's eyes darted over the scene, anger and dread warred within him. He knew immediately that this wasn't a random act of vandalism. It was a calculated move by the HOA, targeting his property over something as trivial as the height of his lawn grass. Unbeknownst to the intruders, however, his wife Lisa was no ordinary victim. A proud veteran of Homeland Security, Lisa had spent years honing her skills in crisis management and tactical operations, skills that had earned her respect and saved lives. And even though she was now heavily pregnant, her resolve remained as unyielding as ever. Lisa had always believed in protecting her family's legacy on the farm, and she would not allow the HOA's bullying to continue unchecked. In that charged moment, as Tom surveyed the wreckage with seething determination, he vowed that justice would be served. Tonight, Karen, the ruthless enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, would learn that the very people she sought to control were far more formidable than she could ever imagine. Tom's mind raced with plans of retribution that would not only expose the HOA's overreach, but also restore the dignity of his family's home. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of Cedar Grove Estates and serve as a wake-up call for every resident who had suffered in silence. Cedar Grove Estates was the picture of suburban order, a gated community where every lawn was immaculately trimmed, every house painted in pastel perfection, and every resident expected to adhere to a strict code of conduct. The local homeowners association ruled with an iron fist, enforcing rules that dictated everything from the color of your mailbox to the precise length of your grass. It was a place where conformity was celebrated, and any hint of deviation was swiftly corrected. At the heart of this regime was Karen Miller, infamously known as HOA Karen. In her mid-50s and always impeccably dressed in tailored suits, Karen had built a reputation as the community's self-appointed guardian of order. With her ever-present clipboard and a smartphone that never left her side, she patrolled the streets with a zeal that made even the smallest infraction seem like a national crisis. Karen's word was law in Cedar Grove Estates, and residents learned quickly that questioning her authority was a risk not worth taking. In stark contrast stood Tom Reynolds, a lifelong resident and proud owner of a sprawling farm on the outskirts of Cedar Grove. Tom had inherited the property from his parents and had built a life rooted in hard work, independence, and a deep love for the land. His farm, though unconventional compared to the cookie-cutter homes of the community, was a testament to resilience and self-reliance. Every season, Tom's farm stand burst forth with vibrant produce and handmade goods, a beacon of local pride and a symbol of his refusal to conform. Lisa Reynolds, Tom's wife, was the cornerstone of their family. Once a dedicated officer with Homeland Security, Lisa had transitioned to a quieter life on the farm, though her tactical skills and steely resolve remained undiminished. Even now, heavily pregnant with their first child, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the worst of the world and survived. To her, the farm was more than just land. It was a legacy, a sanctuary where the values of freedom and self-determination still reigned. While many residents of Cedar Grove Estates conformed to the HOA's rigid standards, Tom and Lisa had always marched to the beat of their own drum. Their farm was a riot of color, life, and creativity, a living counterpoint to the sterile uniformity that the HOA desperately sought to enforce. It was this very difference that had earned them both admiration and disdain among their neighbors. For Tom, the farm stand was not just a business. It was a form of art, a way to celebrate the abundance of nature in defiance of the HOA's constant criticism. Yet, the harmonious balance of Cedar Grove was about to be shattered. Recently, Karen had taken her crusade a step further by ordering an invasive inspection of Tom's property. Her latest target was his wife's shed, a modest structure that housed essential farming equipment and personal mementos. The supposed justification? A complaint that the grass around the shed was unsightly. In Karen's eyes, no detail was too small to warrant punishment. But Tom and Lisa knew better. Their land was theirs to nurture, and every blade of grass and every wooden structure told a story of freedom and hard work. When Karen's enforcers broke into the shed without consent, the violation was personal. It was a direct affront to the sanctity of their home, and it ignited a fire of defiance that would soon transform into a battle for justice. The next few days were a whirlwind of tension and mounting outrage. The day after the break-in, Tom returned to find the shed in disarray. Rummaged through, its contents scattered like confetti. The intrusion wasn't just a violation of privacy. It was an unmistakable message from the HOA. Compliance was non-negotiable, and deviation would be punished severely. Tom immediately began to document every detail. He took photographs of the damaged shed, recorded the broken lock, and collected copies of the inspection report that Karen had filed with the HOA. The report was filled with technical jargon and baseless complaints about aesthetic violations and potential safety hazards. For Tom, it was clear that Karen's actions were less about safety and more about asserting her authoritarian control over anyone who dared to be different. News of the break-in spread quickly through Cedar Grove Estates. Neighbors, already wary of the HOA's overreach, shared their own stories of minor infringements and arbitrary fines. Online forums buzzed with discontent, and hashtags like #PrivacyMatters and #NoMoreKaren began trending locally. The digital backlash was swift and merciless, and many residents expressed their solidarity with Tom and Lisa, praising their courage in standing up against an oppressive system. Meanwhile, Lisa, despite her condition, remained resolute. Having served with Homeland Security, she was no stranger to high-pressure situations, and her background lent her a calm, measured approach to the crisis. While Tom prepared his evidence and rallied community support, Lisa contacted a trusted colleague from her old unit to ensure that the matter was taken seriously by local authorities. Her connections provided an extra layer of credibility, reinforcing the notion that this was not merely a domestic squabble, but a serious abuse of power that warranted intervention. Determined to make a stand, Tom organized a meeting with several affected neighbors and community activists. They strategized on how to present their collective grievances to the HOA board. The group agreed that the breach of privacy was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of arbitrary rule enforcement that had stifled the very spirit of Cedar Grove Estates. They began to compile a comprehensive digital dossier, featuring photos, video footage, and personal testimonials, intended to force the HOA board to re-examine its policies. As the community's digital petition gained traction, Tom realized that simply exposing the violation wouldn't be enough. He needed to send a message that reverberated beyond the confines of his own property. The idea of using his own assets as a counterstrike began to form, a bold, unprecedented move that would force the HOA to confront its own overreach head-on. Drawing on his long-held pride in the family farm, Tom decided that the response would be twofold. First, a public presentation of the evidence to expose the HOA's abusive practices, and second, a symbolic act of defiance that would demonstrate the strength of individual rights. With Lisa's unwavering support and the backing of a united community, Tom began planning a dramatic countermeasure that would turn the tables on the HOA and force them to answer for their actions. He set a date for a community forum, inviting neighbors to share their own experiences and demand reform. In the days leading up to the meeting, he posted updates on social media, Images of the damaged shed, quotes from sympathetic residents, and the hashtag stand up for privacy. The response was overwhelming, with hundreds of residents expressing their support and solidarity. As the tension mounted, Karen's own communications grew increasingly desperate. She issued a series of statements claiming that her actions were in the best interest of community safety and necessary for maintaining order. But every statement was met with scathing rebuttals from the digital dossier, and the public began to see her not as a guardian of order, but as a bully abusing her power. In that heated atmosphere, it became clear that the situation had escalated far beyond a simple violation of property. It was a battle for the very soul of Cedar Grove Estates, a struggle between an oppressive force intent on enforcing conformity and a community determined to reclaim its right to privacy and individual freedom. The tension in Cedar Grove Estates reached a fever pitch as the public forum approached. Social media platforms were ablaze with posts condemning the HOA's actions and rallying around Tom and Lisa's cause. Hashtags like hashtag privacy matters, hashtag stand up for our homes, and hashtag no more Karen were trending, and digital petitions amassed thousands of signatures demanding accountability from the HOA board. Local news outlets began to cover the story extensively. Reporters interviewed residents who shared their own experiences of arbitrary fines and invasive inspections. "It's unbelievable," one neighbor said on air, "that we're forced to live under such oppressive rules. We deserve to have our privacy respected." The growing public sentiment was clear. The community was tired of being micromanaged and bullied by an overzealous enforcer. At the same time, the HOA board, under intense scrutiny, called an emergency meeting to address the mounting crisis. Behind closed doors, heated debates broke out among board members. Some argued that strict enforcement was necessary to maintain the community's standards, while others recognized that Karen's actions had gone too far, crossing the line from regulation into personal vendetta. Leaked minutes from the meeting revealed that several board members were privately supportive of the residents' demands for reform, expressing concerns that the current policies were not only outdated, but also detrimental to the community's cohesion. Tom continued to fortify his digital dossier, posting updates with every new piece of evidence he gathered. He shared security camera footage of the break-in, photographs of the disturbed shed, and screenshots of Karen's official complaint forms. Neighbors began to recount their own stories, and soon a chorus of voices united in a call for change. The hashtag reclaim our privacy began trending as more residents joined the movement. Meanwhile, Lisa leveraged her connections from her Homeland security days. She quietly reached out to local officials, ensuring that the gravity of the situation was understood. Her calm and authoritative manner lent significant weight to their cause, and soon it wasn't just a community dispute. It was a matter of public safety and individual rights. As the days wore on, tensions escalated further when a group of affected residents organized a protest outside the HOA office. They carried signs with messages like "Our homes, our rights, and no more invasion of privacy." The protest, broadcast live on social media, quickly went viral. The digital and physical manifestations of the community's discontent left the HOA board scrambling for a response. Karen Miller, previously so confident in her authority, began to show signs of panic. Her social media updates turned defensive and erratic, with her insisting that her actions were for the greater good. But the overwhelming digital evidence painted a different picture, a picture of an enforcer abusing her power for personal gain. Every new post from Tom and supportive residents further exposed her misdeeds, and the community's anger grew louder with each passing hour. In the midst of this escalating turmoil, the HOA board announced that a final public hearing will be held to address the incident and decide on the future of their enforcement policies. The announcement sent shockwaves through Cedar Grove Estates. In the days leading up to the hearing, the community's digital petition and the online dossier reached unprecedented numbers, with thousands of signatures and countless shares. It was clear that this was more than a personal battle. It was a turning point for the entire neighborhood. On the morning of the final hearing, the community center was packed with residents. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the promise of change and the collective desire to reclaim their privacy and rights. Every face in the crowd told a story of years of silent suffering under arbitrary fines and invasive inspections, and every shared hashtag reaffirmed the community's resolve. Tom, standing among his neighbors, felt a surge of determination. This was his moment to ensure that the abuses of the past would be left behind, paving the way for a future where individual rights were respected above all else. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, a final confrontation between the oppressive practices of the HOA and the unified voice of a community demanding justice. As the public hearing drew nearer, the digital evidence, the fervor of online support, and the impassioned pleas of residents coalesced into an unstoppable force that would force the board to re-examine its policies once and for all. The decisive moment arrived on a cool, crisp morning at the Cedar Grove Community Center, where the final public hearing was underway. The boardroom was filled with a diverse assembly of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of determined residents, all gathered to witness the final vote that would decide the fate of our community's enforcement policies. With a calm yet resolute presence, Councilwoman Denise Harper stepped up to the podium, her eyes shining with the collective resolve of Cedar Grove. After an exhaustive review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed property logs, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Harper began, her voice steady and authoritative. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her unauthorized break-in of a private shed belonging to a resident's pregnant wife, were not motivated by any genuine concern for community order, but were instead a flagrant abuse of power driven by personal vendetta. Our community's rights to privacy and property must be upheld, and no one should be allowed to violate those rights with impunity. A heavy silence fell over the room as Harper continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all sanctions imposed in relation to this incident and will launch a full disciplinary review of the policies that permitted such invasive actions. Furthermore, we will implement new guidelines that ensure every resident's right to manage their property without fear of arbitrary intrusion is protected. Today's decision is not merely about reversing a single violation. It is a resounding declaration that Cedar Grove will stand for justice, accountability, and the inalienable right to privacy. Her words resonated powerfully, and murmurs of agreement swept through the assembly. At that moment, a well-respected community advocate, renowned for his steadfast defense of individual rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "No resident should ever have to endure the tyranny of arbitrary rule enforcement, especially not when it invades the most personal spaces of our lives. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that our community values freedom, privacy, and creative expression above all else. We demand accountability, and we will ensure that every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a collective call for reform. Following his address, a senior officer from the local law enforcement presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official reports that debunked every justification for the HOA's actions. The evidence was irrefutable. The break-in was a gross violation of private property, and the invasive tactics employed by the HOA were entirely unjustified. The Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against those responsible, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Harper concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Grove, a community where every resident's rights are sacred and where public authority is exercised with fairness and integrity. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, no matter how self-righteous, can impose their will on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the unwavering right to live and work without arbitrary interference. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle for privacy and property rights. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Grove. The days of invasive, arbitrary enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks following the historic vote, Cedar Grove underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded sanctions and the sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and on social networks, sparking fervent discussions about privacy rights, community governance, and the sanctity of personal property. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedar Grove" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the decisive actions taken to protect every resident's right to live without intrusive interference. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOA, and #OurPrivacyMatters trended widely, reinforcing the community's determination to stand against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future where personal freedom and creativity were not stifled by bureaucratic overreach. Neighbors, who had long endured the invasive practices of the HOA, now spoke proudly about their right to manage their property on their own terms. "Our homes, our farms, our personal spaces are inviolable," one resident declared passionately at a bustling meeting, his words echoing through the packed room. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Cedar Grove would always protect the rights and privacy of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local law enforcement, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, introduced comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was carefully scrutinized and that no resident would ever again be subjected to arbitrary or invasive measures. Our duty is to uphold the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing the renewed commitment to justice and fairness. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized to empower residents. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about the importance of privacy rights and to encourage an active role in shaping a more equitable governance model. When we stand together, our voices become an unstoppable force for change, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite in the fight for a community built on respect and personal freedom. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up against the HOA's invasive tactics, when they broke into my pregnant wife's shed over nothing more than a complaint about the grass, and to leverage my wife's expertise in Homeland security as a safeguard, had not only reclaimed our family's privacy, but had ignited a movement that resonated throughout Cedar Grove. Neighbors who had long suffered under the oppressive enforcement of arbitrary rules found their voices and shared their own stories of resistance, creating a digital chorus that demanded accountability. The evidence that had once exposed the HOA's misdeeds became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the right to live freely. Karen Miller, once the unchallenged enforcer of the HOA's draconian policies, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united for justice. Her influence waned rapidly as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the need for reform and the perils of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Grove, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the warm glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Privacy" was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches echoed with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate our victory over invasive interference, a victory for every homeowner and every citizen who values their right to privacy. Councilwoman Harper proclaimed, her voice resonating with unwavering determination. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protecting our freedoms and ensuring that no one can abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Cedar Grove, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change.